so an eating disorder cuts across, unfortunately, every aspect of a person's life: emotional, physical, psychological, and behavioral. So generally what you're talking about is some sort of change in the person. It can be a change in eating habits. It can be a big change in a person's personality is often a sign of something going on. A sense of secrecy, a big piece around then social withdrawal, maybe bloodshot in a person's eyes, trips to the bathroom that seem quite unusual, making excuses not to be at food situations or ducking out of the family mealtime experience. And those are some of the experiences we see in terms of warning signs as well. Certainly, I think there's a real positive on social media around eating disorders, in that it is a tool for expression, ultimately. And in an eating disorder context, that's where we see people sharing their recovery journeys and experience. Sometimes that might be from within the hospital or after an appointment. And I think as well, there's a really strong sense of community between people with eating disorders, between each other on the online space, and how they pick up on things. Sometimes I think that those of us working in the area mightn't ordinarily see, and that can be a real learning part as well. It's very easy to fall down certain rabbit holes and spend time online clicking things and just kind of get into kind of a dark space sometimes. And I think we have to be careful with the technology and exercise dimension, in the sense that we shouldn't reduce it to just a numbers game. We need to also keep in mind exercise is important for communication, teamwork, and social skills. And a person's self-worth is not determined by the number of steps or the number of routines they've done. That it's much more than that. So technology is great, and it can give you data and specs and all of that, but it's as much about the taking part. So I think every parent needs to figure out, where does this fit into their child's life? What's their relationship with technology, even before they got a fitness tracker, for example, and then setting aside some boundaries that they're not kind of totally caught up in it throughout the whole week. Trolling is a reality, people using anonymous accounts, and we know some of that culture happens and does exist and can be very damaging to people. I think for parents, really, it's about I think maintaining an open curiosity about their child's online habits and digital lives, and to get informed as a parent about what's out there, but also with the platforms, what the reporting tools are, and if the child has seen something that's difficult, that can then be reported and hopefully taken down. And within the child themselves, I think not to take problems on board and to bury them within themselves, but to actually put their hands up and say, this is something I've seen, I've found it really difficult. And as well, just to have the conversation, to be mindful and vigilant around what's online doesn't necessarily reflect reality, both in terms of how things are conveyed, and particularly as well around the body and weight and diet and food and exercise. There can be sometimes a very black and white before and after presentation of how things are put across, without necessarily much sense of what has gone into that in reality. So it's kind of to have that critical consumer take on some of what's happening online around the physical appearance. There's a useful expression, which is, nature loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. In other words, genetics plus environmental factors can potentially lead to an eating disorder. At the same time, not everyone who has a genetic risk will ultimately develop an eating disorder. And we do know as well there are very significant issues around abuse, trauma, and bullying, and weight-based teasing as well can be very damaging to a person, because ultimately they disempower a person, and a person doesn't have the coping mechanism, and that can then set them on the path to be changing their relationship with food and exercises, and that can become very entrenched, very difficult, and quite inflexible. So kind of there's no set one cause, if you like, in terms of eating disorders, and sadly we know that an eating disorder does endure often for a very long time, and there can be really a real difficult kind of relentlessness to living with an eating disorder, but then also for the family experience as well. I think finally I would point to research by Dr. Una Foy and colleagues, which was an analysis of social media posts on the website Reddit, where that community was talking about recovery. And the description there, which has always stayed with me by one person, was 4 words: the world opens up. And if we think about what an eating disorder takes away from a person, it's quite extraordinary then that someone would use language like that the world opens up. And then I think finally I would add with recovery is that people really need connections to recover. That's a big piece too. And interestingly enough, we know there's a real social dimension to recovery. So as much as a person might need the health system, they might need a multidisciplinary support, it's often that local community, personal family piece is really important too, that it's not just going into a health system, because we know people generally don't get fully better from an eating disorder in a hospital situation. That's often medical stabilization, reducing the level of risk and crisis, but it's really a lot of the treatment can be outside of the traditional clinical space, as it were.